We look at the Trump impeachment defense, future 2024 presidential candidates, and new legislation coming out against 230, as well as campaign finance. These stories and more on your February 9th Not So News update. Starting us off from the Washington Times, we have an article going into the Trump's legal defense. In the article, they state the following. Former President Donald Trump's defense of the Senate impeachment trial will include videos of Democrats encouraging violence, one of his lawyers said Friday. The clips would counter videos that Democrats likely will show the riot at Capitol and Mr. Trump's fiery speech at the rally shortly before the attack on January 6th, which Mr. Trump stands accused of inciting. Trump lawyer Bruce Castor told Fox News' Laura Ingraham, "You can count on that," when asked about using a video montage of Democratic members of Congress calling for violence against Trump's administration officials and law enforcement. "I've been looking at a lot of video over the past couple of days," Mr. Castor said. "You better be careful what you wish for." Mr. Trump's primary defense at the trial, however, will be the Senate lacks jurisdiction. At the proceeding, which is scheduled to begin Tuesday, Mr. Trump's lawyer will argue the Senate shouldn't hear an impeachment trial since Mr. Trump already left office. Mr. Castor said the punishment, if convicted, is removal, which makes the issue moot. By the House impeachment resolution logic, they could go back and impeach Abraham Lincoln, he said. House Democrats charged Mr. Trump for inciting violence with his claims of election fraud and urging his supporters to protest the joint session of Congress, which convened to certify the 2020 results. They say he mobilizes voters to carry out the attack. This continues what we have been continually saying is the three-prong issue that needs to be addressed with the impeachment, and it's really gone down to two questions. The first is, what is the standing, or in this article they state the jurisdiction of the Senate with Trump's impeachment, and then secondly, was Trump's language not protected by First Amendment speech? To answer the first question, we already saw that vote by Rand Paul about a week ago, which ended up being a 55-45 vote, with not getting the 67 votes needed for a conviction, which really implies that we're not going to see a conviction for the Trump administration. But it's really a question we need to address is, do we want this to be the trend going forward? Can a party just impeach a former president? I think this sets up a very concerning precedent if we did allow this. I think generally the view that we should hold is that the American people can hold that official accountable if they were to run again in the future. Let's say Trump were to run in 2024, then he would be responsible to the American public in that election, and I'm sure that the question would come up on the campaign trail, and it would be something he would have to answer for. In reference to some of the speeches that the Trump's defense team will most likely use, BJ Media brought up the following clip of Kamala Harris on the Ellen show, which points at potential violence that she called for.
If you had to be stuck in an elevator with either President Trump, Mike Pence, or Jeff Sessions, who would it be?
Does one of us have to come out alive?
This really goes back to a trend that we've been seeing a lot of. You know, when the left calls for violence, you know, it's normally joked about, it's laughed off, you know, it's seen as acceptable. But when the right does it and there's ramifications, we hold them to a different standard. I think it's time that we step back and hold this universal standard that we had when we first really embraced the First Amendment. If it's a direct incitement of violence, then it's not protected. Otherwise, it is. We know in the Trump trial that his speech does not directly break the First Amendment, based on the fact that the federal DOJ and DC prosecutors have not charged or arrested him. If his speech did in fact break First Amendment protocol precedent and, you know, case law or whatever, then he would have been convicted by now. That proves without a doubt that the impeachment trial going on is purely for political effect. It's to, in a sense, get back at Trump. Like I said, I think this sets up a very scary precedent, and I don't want to see this going. Next, about a week ago, we heard about Ron DeSantis in Florida, who created a couple new laws when it came to 230 reforms, particularly that he wanted to make it so it was illegal for social media to take conservatives off of their applications, specifically during campaigning. And Texas Governor Abbott is working on a similar set of laws. From Fox Business, Texas Governor Abbott working on legislation to prevent social media platforms from canceling conservative speech. This comes from a tweet that the governor stated that he's working with Senator Hughes on legislation to prevent social media providers like Facebook and Twitter from canceling conservative speech. I think if conservatives really want to get something like this passed, what they need to do is stay away from 230 changes, and more look at making political affiliation turn into something like a protected class. Currently the way that protected classes work is specifically on the issue of something like race. You cannot not serve a business or not serve a customer based on them being Black, white, Asian, etc. I think what we're going to see going forward is Republicans push for legislation that says you cannot discriminate based on someone being a Republican, Democrat, Independent, etc. This does set up a interesting precedent of would that go to more radical groups, like would Nazis be protected, would communists, would socialism, etc. Next, we see House Republicans introduce the Omar Act to ban campaigns from paying candidate spouses. Obviously, this is a reference to Ilhan Omar, who's been criticized for giving $2.8 million to her husband's firm during the 2020 election campaign. And in it, they reference some Democrats that potentially could jump on board to this. Specifically, they mention Adam Schiff from California, who proposed a similar proposal in 2007 with support of Nancy Pelosi. From Washington Times, they say, Mr. Schiff said in 2007 press release that candidates run for federal office to serve the public and not to financially profit from the campaign. There have been too many reports of corruption and abuse in Congress over the last few years, and the passage of this bill with bipartisan support marks an important step forward in restoring the public's confidence that elected officials are working in the public's interest and not their own. Mr. Schiff said, candidates run for federal office to serve the public, not to financially profit from the campaign. Mr. Tiffany said the Omar Act was based on Mr. Schiff's Campaign Expenditure Transparency Act. I think this does potentially have a chance of getting passed in a bipartisan manner. I think a lot of people are looking for campaign reforms when it comes to spending. Something that's always been on the conservative mind has been how to equally treat media campaigns. So I always give the example of we have so ever much that's considered the most you can give to a financial campaign. Let's just say $1,000. Let's say a bakery wants to give it to a particular candidacy. They can give $1,000 in cash. They can bake $1,000 worth of cookies and donate them for a campaign event. However, what we don't see is that same campaign finance being held as the standard for things like TV stations, newsprint, etc., which is why there's often complaints about biased media, because they are essentially giving free campaign dollars to the particular candidate of their choice. I think really the only way to avoid something like this is to get rid of most of the campaign finance restrictions that we currently have, which limit how much a particular individual can give, because we have individuals that can give as much as they want currently. But that's something I really want to look into more in the upcoming years. Finally, while talking about campaigns, Candace Owens gave a short tweet that looks like there's potential for her to run as a Republican candidate in 2024. In a tweet, she said, "I love America, thinking about running for president." And in the US Mags Press, they state this news comes after Owens accused far-left Representative AOC of lying about the events on January 6, where AOC claimed she feared for her life. Owens tweeted, "On a day which #Alexandria Ocasio-Millet is trending, please never forget the time that AOC staged a photo shoot dressed in all white at a parking lot to spread lies about immigrant children faking her own attempted murder was the next logical step. I do think Candace Owens is a bit too polarizing to be an effective candidate in the 2024 election. I actually live streamed a couple of my predictions for 2024, and some of the more interesting picks that I had that I'll share were Dan Crenshaw. He's, I think, a pretty safe pick to run in 2024. I think both Governor Abbott and Ron DeSantis from Florida and Texas are potential candidates. A little more interesting would be Tulsi Gabbard. She actually did a interview with Fox, and yeah, I think she's been making a lot of trends on mostly conservative media such as Gab, Minds, and she was originally on Parler. So I think even though she's still registered as a Democrat, there's potential in the next 4 years that she will flip over. She's been doing a lot of conversations around free speech and tech reforms when it comes to censoring speech. I think she could get a legitimate support within a Republican base, and she would be somewhat of a return to normalcy that I think Trump supporters would be willing to jump on. But that's just, a prediction. We have 3 years before we need to worry about 2024. So we'll see what happens. And with that, that's your February 9th Not So News update. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and have a good one.